All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're doing a bit of time traveling, straight back to the year 1878. We've got our hands on this incredibly fascinating historical travelogue excerpt, and when we read these old travelogues, we aren't just learning about the destination, right? We're actually learning some deeply revealing things about the traveler themselves. So we're going to dive right into this brief but honestly super dense observation made by a European traveler in the Middle East. It's really going to unpack a lot about how cultures collided and perceived each other back in the late 19th century.
So the artifact we're looking at is Journey to the Alawite Mountains, 1878, written by a French traveler, writer, and historian named Léon Cahun. Just taking a look at this atmospheric cover art, it completely transports us back to the 19th century Middle East. You gotta remember, when Cahun made this trek, the world was a completely different place. Travel was painfully slow, information was scarce, and European powers were, well, they were heavily invested in observing, categorizing, and frankly, trying to influence the Middle East. Cahun kept these really meticulous diaries of everything he saw, and we're about to break down one specific, incredibly revealing paragraph he wrote in Paris later that very same year.
Let's jump straight into his very first observation in this excerpt. Cahun writes, "I didn't try to delve into political conversations so it wouldn't end up speaking in whispers in the ear." Wow, right? Right off the bat, Cahun paints this intense picture of extreme caution. Just imagine you're a foreign traveler. You're trying to figure out local dynamics, and the literal second you bring up politics, the volume just drops. People physically lean in. Voices turn to whispers. It's such a striking visual, isn't it? It shows a society where speaking your mind openly about power or governance just wasn't safe, or at least highly socially unacceptable. Cahun picked up on this barrier immediately and made the conscious choice to just back off.
Now, the real kicker is how Cahun interprets all this whispering. He doesn't just brush it off as some passing oddity. Instead, he blames it on what he calls a cultural love of ambiguity. Now, think about his European sensibilities for a second. In places like Paris or London back then, political debates were loud, public, totally boisterous. So this active avoidance of clear, open political talk felt completely alien to him. He realized that the locals were deliberately using ambiguity as a shield. Basically, if you aren't clear about where you stand, you can't be easily targeted, right? Reading between the lines wasn't just some polite social skill here. It was literally a survival mechanism. To really grasp this, we have to look through the specific 1878 lens that Cahun was using. He framed this whole behavior as Eastern ambiguity. Now let's be real, this is your classic 19th century generalization, lumping huge, incredibly diverse populations under one broad label like Easterners. But unpacking his definition actually helps us understand the mindset of the era. For Cahun, this ambiguity was this widespread cultural preference for indirectness. It was the strict societal norm that entirely stopped people from sharing their true political thoughts out in the open. He didn't necessarily think they lacked opinions, but rather that they had this deeply ingrained behavioral code just to navigate a really complex, maybe even volatile political landscape.
And seeing the original Arabic translation of this text excerpt, straight from Cahun's diary dated Paris 1878, it really grounds the whole thing, doesn't it? It makes the history feel physical. So we've just picked apart the first half of this passage, the part all about the whispers and the political secrecy. But here's the thing. Cahun didn't just stop there. He didn't just write off the people he met as overly secretive and leave it at that. Actually, the diary entry takes his massive pivot, and we're about to uncover a pretty striking contrast in what he observed.
Listen to this sharp turn in his narrative. He writes, "But I admit that there is no honorable and strong people worthy of good more than this people." Okay, that is a profound shift. Despite all the political barriers and the hushed whispers, Cahun clearly developed this deep, fundamental admiration for the locals he spent time with. He's actively looking past that surface-level political caution, and he's making a definitive judgment about their core character. The words he chooses are huge, honorable, strong, worthy of good. It shows this fascinating juxtaposition in his head. He's seeing a society that might be politically suppressed or super cautious, but is also inherently noble and socially robust. And then he follows that up with this incredibly evocative phrase. He describes them as a people who longs with all his limbs for civilization and respects himself. I mean, the imagery there is just so intense and physical. Longs with all his limbs. It gives you this feeling of a desperate, whole-body yearning for progress, for advancement, for whatever Cahun meant by civilization. On top of that, he specifically points out their profound self-respect. In his eyes, these aren't a defeated people at all. They're an incredibly proud group, maybe temporarily held back, but completely eager to sprint toward a modern future. So let's look at how this builds into this really fascinating duality. Cahun has essentially constructed two competing images for us. On the one side, you've got political caution, all those whispers, the avoidance, that protective ambiguity we talked about.
But then, on the flip side, you have societal strength, defined by deep honor, immense self-respect, and that visceral physical longing for progress. For Cahun, the real tragedy, or the core tension of his whole trip, was witnessing this massive, dormant potential just trapped beneath a necessary layer of political silence. It's a very dramatic, somewhat romanticized view of the society he was visiting.
All right, before we get to the absolute final piece of Cahun's quote, we really need to set the stage by understanding the 19th century European lens. The late 1800s was the absolute peak of European imperial expansion. European intellectuals, travelers, they generally viewed themselves as the ultimate pinnacle of global civilization. Because of that, when they traveled to the Middle East, they inherently, almost automatically, believed that they held the magic keys required to unlock the potential they saw in other cultures. Keep that specific mindset right at the front of your brain as we look at his final conclusion.
And here it is. Here's how Cahun resolves all that tension he observed. He writes, "Just as with a little European support, he will know with all the confirmation of the peoples how to surround himself with respect, always." Wow. This right here is the ultimate 1878 European takeaway. Cahun is impartially laying out his final thought. These honorable, strong people who yearn for so much progress, well, they just need a little European support to unlock their destiny and command global respect. He totally views European intervention not as an intrusion at all, but as the absolutely necessary missing ingredient for this society to fully realize its own potential.
Let's quickly recap the logic flow we've just unpacked here, because it happens in 3 very distinct steps. Step 1, he encounters the surface reality, right? The political silence and the whispers. Step 2, he looks a little deeper and recognizes this profound inner honor and a strong desire for progress among the people. And then, step 3, he projects his own 19th century worldview right onto the situation, concluding that European influence is the required catalyst to bridge the gap between their current caution and their future glory. Honestly, it's a perfect microcosm of historical travel writing, super keen observation mixed heavily with the inherent biases of the author's homeland.
As we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a couple of things to chew on. First off, how does the passage of over 140 years change how we read these travel logs? I mean, today, we can clearly spot Cahun's specific historical biases in a way his original readers probably couldn't. And secondly, think about that whole concept of political ambiguity and whispers in the ear. Does that kind of extreme caution still pop up in societies today when people are trying to navigate really complex political landscapes? History is rarely just about the past. It almost always holds a mirror right up to the present. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back to 1878. Until next time, keep questioning and keep learning.